Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. Snow packed tight over centuries had begun to collapse from within. Not in avalanches, not in sudden violence, but in subtle internal shifts, layers thinning, compacted ice bleeding cold air into seams that hadn't seen daylight since before language. Instruments picked it up first. Low-frequency tremors that didn't register as danger but refused to settle. Wind moved differently across the ridge. Sound changed pitch near the southern flank of the camp. Satellite updates showed a long white artery splitting along the ridgeline. What had been stable for a decade was softening. In field reports, the team logged only weather anomalies, minor structural shifts in the melt zone, nothing more. Nobody mentioned the unease that came when footsteps didn't crunch quite right, when heat sensors flicked for no reason, when hands pulling ice cores met patches that resisted without resistance, as if something just beneath refused to participate. On the third day of drilling, a low vibration ran through the sublayers, not from machinery, but something held beneath. Instruments didn't know how to name it. Core samplers stuck at depth 92. Pulling them free took longer than expected. No explanation surfaced, only a thin trace of fibrous residue, almost organic yet unclassifiable. Field lead requested ground sonar for anomaly mapping. Within hours, the map printed out a black hollow 30 meters below surface. Perfectly vertical. Not a cave, not a tunnel, not shaped by any natural hydrology. Walls smooth, symmetrical. No surrounding collapse, no stress fractures in ice. A cylindrical chamber, airless, sealed tight. They believed it was a pocket, a trapped void. Maybe even a preserved habitat, frozen mid-collapse. They dropped heat probes. Temperature surrounding the cavity held steady at -12, far too warm for its depth. One camera cable fed through a borehole, reaching just above the void's upper arc. Visuals came in blurry at first. Then something moved into focus, not motion, but form. A ridge, a shoulder, light curvature that made no architectural sense. Silence in the tent as the feed cleared. What stared back was not wall, not rock, not carving on surface. A figure stood in that chamber. Upright. Facing outward. Arms close to body, palms relaxed. Its gaze aligned with the camera, blank, unreadable, carved too precisely for chance. No eyes, yet undeniable orientation. Material didn't reflect light like ice or stone. Nor did it scatter it. Something in the surface drank it in, softened it, offered no signature to UV or thermal scans. No visible seams. No decay. Hands sculpted with anatomical exactness, down to the folds at the base of each digit. Attempts to extract it began without consensus. No one wanted to touch it first. Not out of fear, not really. More like waiting for someone else to speak a language no one had taught. Eventually, they cut a wider cavity, used vibration-based excavation to dislodge the outer shell of ice. It came away cleaner than expected. No shattering, no melt runoff, no fissures. As if the figure had been resting, not buried. No tool marks. No abrasion. No evidence of pressure distortion from the glacier around it. 40 millennia of weight should have warped the figure, collapsed detail, crushed edge. Instead, it stood untouched, as though installed just before arrival. Someone joked it looked like someone they'd met. Laughter didn't follow. Flights into Greenland land hard, tires screeching on wind-scraped tarmac. He didn't speak to anyone on arrival, just signed the clearance forms with a black pen missing its cap. Jacket too thin for the cold, scarf folded the wrong way, boots that looked like they hadn't been worn outside a city. Eyes didn't scan the landscape. They searched for boundaries. Camp layout, generator hum, the way researchers avoided eye contact when they passed the operations tent. Something about the air made breath feel boxed in, like exhaling into cloth. Assigned quarters held a cot, a steel locker, a desk with a thin briefing folder already opened, though no one claimed to have touched it. No reactions to the contents were noted, no visible disturbance logged, but the temperature dropped 2 degrees shortly after he entered. Condensation formed along the inside of the windowpane. Fingers brushed against the page corners, then pulled away. Not hesitation. Not dread. Something quieter. The first viewing took place at twilight. He hadn't asked to see the figure. In fact, he'd asked nothing at all beyond nutrient content in the surrounding meltwater. Others assumed it was scientific reserve. Only the coordinator noticed the stiffness in his posture when the tent flap opened and the containment shell came into view. Inside, spotlights had been repositioned. No shadows fell across the sculpture's face. The resemblance didn't sneak up, it struck directly. Not resemblance. Identity. Same curvature beneath the brow, same asymmetry at the mouth's corner. The left ear slightly collapsed at the tip, not unlike his own. On its right cheek, a faint indentation, half-moon-shaped, placed exactly where his scar had formed after a bicycle crash 25 years earlier. That detail silenced the room. No one dared mention it. He didn't move closer. He didn't blink more than once. Breathing slowed, then vanished into short bursts barely enough to fog his glasses. Someone handed him a thermal tablet. He accepted it without looking. A photo loaded on screen showed the sculpture from a side angle. It shouldn't have triggered anything. Still, his hand twitched. Grip loosened. The tablet slid to the floor with a muted impact. When asked if he recognized the face, there was no pause before denial. No visible strain in voice. Words came too easily. Dismissal without curiosity. No questions about origin, no request to examine the dating analysis, no reaction to the preservation anomaly. Instead, a polite nod, brief thanks, a request for atmospheric methane maps across the southern ridges. The figure, according to him, meant nothing. That night, lights in his tent remained on long past midnight. Generator logs confirmed multiple restarts due to low power draw spike. No movement registered on thermal cameras. Only once did the tent flap lift, around 3:14 a.m., revealing a man seated on the edge of his cot, unmoving, elbows on knees, staring at nothing. He never asked to see it again. No one made him. Yet each morning, he walked the perimeter of the excavation site. Not close enough to trigger alarms. Just far enough to keep it in sight. No tools, no notebook. Always alone. No data collected. No samples taken. Just a line drawn into the snow by his boots, each loop tighter than the last. Padded crates weren't meant for human likeness. The figure didn't shift during transport. No jostle, no slippage inside the vacuum-stabilized rig. Customs at Thule gave clearance without a second glance. Copenhagen's receiving lab signed off by midday, though 2 technicians forgot to initial the internal manifest, which had never happened before. Temperature sensors in the shipping hold showed an ambient drift, 1 degree warmer near the crate despite refrigeration. Once secured in the scanning bay, the figure was placed upright, precisely as found. No support required. Weight distribution along its base puzzled the engineers. No reinforcement inside, yet the center of mass held perfectly in balance. Surface scans failed to detect anomalies. It didn't absorb radiation nor reflect it. Imaging required adjustments no one anticipated. Every reading returned frictionless. First CT pass yielded nothing but surface. Interior massed itself in uniform density. Not empty. Not solid. Just unreadable. On the 5th scan, after recalibrating the vertical gantry and lowering X-ray intensity, new patterns appeared. Not veins, not hollow stratified lattices nested deep within. Closer to architecture than anatomy. One technician described it as layers pressed together like language without symbol. That description wasn't recorded in the official log. A separate scan under multispectral analysis revealed something embedded in the shoulder region, fine filaments twisted into an irregular loop. Organic traces, possibly keratin, surrounded by hardened deposits unlike bone or fossil. Material registered no known taxonomy. Lab botanist ran it twice. Third attempt was stopped by supervisor instruction. No incision made. No invasive sampling approved. Team chose full spectrometry sweep. Data returned inconclusive on composition but clear on age. Embedded organic particulates, trapped within sealed microfractures, dated to late Paleolithic range. Margin placed earliest formation between 38 and 41,000 years before present. Samples were non-contaminated. That much was verified. Chain of custody held. The resemblance could no longer be contained. One assistant overseeing resolution enhancement flagged a comparison frame as error, until the overlay confirmed identical positioning of cranial landmarks, mandibular slope, orbital spacing. Same asymmetry at chin. A single birthmark visible just beneath the lower jawline, faint on the sculpture but undeniably placed. Someone outside the team accessed the data server that night. Lab security logs showed no breach. No external drive detected. In the morning, stills from the imaging suite appeared across 4 anonymous message boards, cropped tightly around the face, side by side with a press photo taken years earlier. Caption read only, "Same man." 40 millennia apart. News outlets picked it up within hours. Comment threads filled with speculation, disbelief, parody, disgust. Few took it seriously. Fewer knew what to do with the timeline. A handful of fringe researchers resurfaced archival maps, hunting for mythic reference points in glacial zones. None matched. Back inside the lab, requests for access multiplied. University trustees scheduled unannounced walkthrough. 2 linguists arrived without clearance. No further scans authorized. A moratorium imposed until provenance could be resolved. The figure remained untouched. Not one scratch, not one mark of transit or handling. Cold chamber held its temperature precisely, yet infrared maps showed minor warmth at the core. Not enough to suggest energy. Just enough to raise a question. Those working closest to the sculpture refused to speculate. Their notes grew shorter. No theories proposed. No interviews granted. No explanations offered. Only silence in the presence of what refused to be explained. Screens lit up across continents, not with breaking news, but with a question no one had language for. 2 faces stared from opposite sides of time, frozen in a match so precise it left no room for misidentification. Cheekbone gradient, eye depth, the curve of lips parted just slightly at rest. Digital overlays showed alignment tighter than forensic reconstruction allows. An identical silhouette pressed against a prehistoric mold. Data didn't argue. It just confirmed. Institutions that had once quoted his work began phrasing citations more cautiously. Panels where his name had drawn curiosity were rebranded. Conference invitations dropped without explanation. No official exclusion ever issued. Just a gentle redirection of spotlight, away from a man who had somehow existed before sculpture, despite all math, all memory, all recorded origin. Newspapers ran speculative columns dressed as science commentary. Reincarnation was whispered not as belief, but as placeholder. Satirical outlets published illustrated timelines suggesting cryogenic mishaps, ancient cloning cults, time-looped genetic. None of it stuck. All of it multiplied. A private biotech firm based in Zurich offered a full molecular breakdown of the sculpture, pro bono. Letters marked urgent arrived in brown envelope. Couriers hand-delivered contracts to his former university office. Terms promised confidentiality, exclusive rights to findings, named recognition in any published material. He returned nothing. When pressed, he issued a single typed page stating no consent would be given for biological extraction, present or future. He sold his apartment within the month. Account activity slowed, then vanished. No forwarding address listed. The last recorded transaction was for a second-hand coat purchased from a corner shop on a wet Tuesday morning, 3 blocks from the museum where the sculpture had been relocated under armed watch. Former colleagues speculated without consequence. Some claimed he'd begun studying Bronze Age burial rites in private. One assistant mentioned notebooks filled with annotated cave etchings from regions no longer above sea level. No one could confirm. Most avoided speaking on record. A term surfaced in academic circles, unspoken but understood. The Weiss artifact. Not sculpture. Not discovery. Artifact. Not to denote origin but burden. A shorthand for that which should not be but is. Students whispered it as a cautionary tale. Researchers who had worked within proximity found their careers slowing. One resigned after publishing a paper on neural image retention and facial ancestral recurrence. Journal quietly pulled the article weeks later. The sculpture remained sealed behind reinforced glass. No one touched it. No further scans attempted. A climate-controlled system kept the room balanced within a half-degree margin. Twice per week, specialists logged routine atmospheric readings, none of which required them to stand directly before it. Over time, fewer did. His name faded from lecture halls. Course materials updated without announcement. But every so often, someone in a quiet lab, hundreds of miles away, would pull up that image. Face from ice, face from now, and pause just long enough to feel something settle inside the ribs. Not fear. Not awe. Just a presence that didn't match the hour. A sense that time had folded once. Maybe more than once. Without anyone noticing. Under close light, the sculpture's surface betrayed refinements that made no archaeological sense. Skin contours shaped not through broad carving strokes, but through compression, as though pressed gently into form rather than etched from without. The ridge beneath each eye curved upward slightly, not in expression but in anatomical anticipation, as if crafted to mimic emotion before it happened. No Ice Age reference point offered such fluency in muscle tension. The temples showed subtle asymmetry, one side drawn tighter, hinting at a habitual squint. Not decorative. Observe. Paleoartists asked for casts. Requests denied. Only images circulated, carefully measured, angles cropped to reduce risk of digital manipulation. Still, even these frames revealed decisions no prehistoric artist had ever recorded. Shadow points beneath the collarbone, tension held where breath would gather, minute depressions at the knuckles not of motion, but of age. Every inch betrayed a hand familiar with living flesh, not idle. Behind the right ear, concealed within a fold no lighting rig could catch directly, a narrow indentation curved into an unfamiliar shape. No pattern. No glyph. A simple character with no ceremonial flourish. The curve bent once, cut sharply, and held. No culture had used it. No known script matched it. One mathematician called it a modified logical disjunction, the kind used in proofwork, but inverted. Others dismissed it as a pressure dent from transport, until closer inspection showed depth uniformity down to the micron. Material density around the marking was higher than any other point on the sculpture. Not reinforcement. Compression. Whatever created that mark had applied force impossible without fracture. Yet no break formed. No fault lines. No granular shifts under high-resolution scan. Ethnoarchaeologists traced old migration lines, trying to stitch together a plausible origin. Glacial movement models were rerun, this time considering tool access and climate capacity for temporary settlement. Nothing matched. No trace of campsite. No soot signatures. No bone scatter, no refuse patterns. Dig sites found only untouched permafrost and older stone strata, undisturbed since before human navigation of the region was possible. Some proposed a coastal entry, suggesting the figure may have been transported before burial. But erosion layers argued otherwise. Ice hadn't shifted at that depth in over 39,000 years. Seismic scans showed compression rings consistent with still placement, not impact. Meaning whatever left it there had done so gently, with precision, before the glacier thickened above it. Attention turned inward. Not toward the origin, but toward the maker. The absence of error suggested no experimentation. Whoever formed it had done so without correction. No draft versions. No tool fragments. No discarded works. Just this one. Conservationists questioned if it could have been molded rather than sculpted. Experts from industrial casting laughed at the thought. Nothing about its form allowed for a mold process without complete disassembly. No pour point. No separation line. Not even atomic inconsistency in the core matrix. One physicist observed that heat hadn't touched it. Not once. Artists tried to recreate it using clay, wax, stone, even 3D print composite. Each result felt manufactured. The original refused such comparison. Not because of material but because of restraint. Every attempt added something human. The original took nothing with it. No signature should have existed. No mark should have survived that long without intention. Yet it remained, unweathered, tucked where only silence could find it. A mark that did not ask to be understood, only noticed. Not once. But eventually. The report arrived folded in half, its envelope soaked along the bottom from snowmelt no one could explain. A field crew in southeast Iceland, documenting meltwater shifts near Vatnajökull, recorded seismic interference localized to a thin cavern beneath a runoff basin. Initial scans suggested typical lava tube collapse. Measurements corrected that within hours. No basalt. No volcanic crust. Material beneath the ice registered smooth, without fracture, absorbing heat differently from surrounding stone. No one authorized excavation. They did it anyway. Inside the chamber, oxygen thinned without warning. Breathing masks failed under sensor readings that showed no toxin, no pressure shift. Just air too still to move. The cavity opened inward, ribbed with thin columns of ancient frost. At its center, a single slab of something resting against the far wall. Not placed. Dropped. The lower half of a human figure, carved from the same non-reflective material as the original discovery. No base. No neck. From waist to clavicle, intact. Above that, torn at an angle that resisted fracture analysis. Dust samples from beneath the fragment dated back to roughly the same window as Greenland. Surface temperature held stable, yet visual distortions along the edges disrupted drone imaging. Moisture refused to freeze along the torso's contours. No explanation held. Texture, composition, microdensity. Every test confirmed a match. A cross-lab study took 3 weeks to rule out coincidence. Material identical down to trace isotope. Same unplaceable resistance to thermal shift. Same silence under vibration. The torso differed in design. Shoulders bore signs of tension, as if frozen mid-turn. Left hand drawn inward toward the sternum. Rib detail etched with less perfection than its predecessor, though still surpassing any prehistoric standard. Musculature hinted at a different body. Slightly smaller. Rib spacing narrower. Waist ratio shifted toward female skeletal form. Initial commentary avoided that conclusion. One researcher pulled archival lectures for review. During a panel recorded 2 years earlier, an art historian had dismissed the Greenland discovery as atmospheric pareidolia, a case of human pattern-making under scientific pressure. She had published the paper within 48 hours of the initial leak. Her name came up again during analysis of the Iceland fragments' facial reconstruction. Not from within the excavation team. Not through research. But from a lab assistant running facial index matching across database archives, attempting to rule out false recognition. When the reconstruction finalized, the resemblance could not be adjusted away. Slope of chin. Orbital frame. Tragus position. Bone depth in the right cheek. Not generic. Specific. 1-to-1. No margin for family resemblance. No shared ancestry. No migration pattern could explain it. She had never visited Iceland. Passport records confirmed. Conference itineraries had kept her in Belgium, Paris, Glasgow. Not one photo placed her within 100 miles of that cave. Still, her likeness sat preserved in fractured black stone beneath a melting glacier, dated tens of thousands of years before her first published monograph. She made no statement. Her colleagues released one instead, citing stress, confusion, privacy. She disappeared from faculty listings within a month. The department issued a course adjustment bulletin citing structural reorganization. No forwarding email provided. Students asked questions. None were answered. The torso was transferred under low visibility protocol to a secure archival vault below the Danish National Gallery. Shipping logs redacted content. Receiving forms listed it as weathered sculpture fragment, provenance unknown. 3 handlers were reassigned the following week. One submitted a resignation letter typed entirely in lowercase, signed with initials no one recognized. The fragment was never placed on display. No plaque commissioned. No lecture held. No article followed. Only a face, missing its mouth, sealed in basaltic glass, sharing features with a woman who insisted nothing about it resembled her. The exposé premiered on a Thursday, time-stamped to the hour that online engagement peaked. 43 minutes of high-resolution breakdowns, voiceover woven with skepticism dressed as certainty. Claims of duplicated micropatterns, mirrored dust dispersal, pixel anomalies across grayscale overlays. Assertions layered over dramatic zooms, all designed to frame belief as gullibility. Every flourish backed by pseudocode flashed too quickly for comprehension. A man accustomed to dismantling viral mythology had turned his attention to this. He called it a digital forgery. Accused the scientific community of collusion by omission. Claimed that photogrammetry software used in Glacier documentation had been manipulated to simulate depth variance. Pointed to shadow clusters near the orbital ridge of the first sculpture, describing them as proof of algorithmic repetition. Suggested that both discoveries had originated from the same base mesh. His voice never trembled. Confidence in his breath, arrogance in his stillness. The reaction came fast. Not defensive. Not outraged. Just cold. Independent labs responded with silence first. Then peer-reviewed publication. Not rebuttal. Evidence. Scans rerun across 8 facilities. Material subjected to triple-axis neutron diffraction. Density mapped at atomic intervals. No repeating patterns. No mirrored contours. No compression artifacts from synthetic modeling. Data made public. Audit logs available. Chain of custody attached to every frame, every scan, every spectral pass. Attention shifted to the chemistry. Not the shape. The substance. Isotopic analysis began with control samples from terrestrial quarries across 36 countries. Baselines established. Known contaminants filtered. When compared, neither sculpture aligned with any documented geological source. The elemental composition presented stable isotopes of silicon, magnesium, and an unidentified silicate compound bearing oxygen signatures not observed in sedimentary records. Ratios placed them outside planetary formation norms. No atmospheric interference. No post-depositional alteration. No trace of pigment. No polymer traces. No signs of adhesive bonding. Internal core analysis showed no cavity, no seams, no indications of additive layering. Whatever had shaped the figures had done so in a single event. Not molded. Not carved. Induced into form. Grain structure consistent across all axes. Crystalline alignment that shifted under angle-corrected diffraction scans, as though tuned to light rather than source pressure. Lab technicians began refusing to work alone with the samples. Not from fear. From refusal to guess. Every test ended not with anomaly, but absence of pattern. Theory could not keep pace. No contamination. No radiation trace. No historical correlation. The exposé's creator issued a follow-up. A shorter piece. Apologetic in tone but laced with quiet defiance. He acknowledged the chemical inconsistency. Admitted errors in pattern recognition. Suggested again that psychological priming played a role in public reaction. He deleted the original video 2 days later. His channel remained, but no new content followed. The sculptures stayed under review. Museums declined acquisition. Universities reframed their involvement as temporary custodianship. Legal discussions regarding ownership paused indefinitely. The term artifact was replaced in formal documents with item. One laboratory began referring to the Iceland fragment simply as Torso 1. No calendar date assigned to its discovery. No comment permitted on resemblance to living persons. Researchers continued. Not because they believed. Because the evidence refused to vanish. No matter how many hands measured its silence. Letters stopped arriving. Not slowly. Not in decline. Just ceased. No returns, no redirections, no forwarding address on file. Email accounts remained active, but inboxes went untouched. Drafts accumulated without timestamp. Calls rang out without tone. No disconnection notice ever issued. The signal remained, but the person behind it folded inward. Neighbors in Munich remembered someone who no longer made eye contact. Curtains drawn even in daylight. Groceries left untouched on the stoop, carried inside only after sunset. No lights visible through the windows, though heating remained constant. One child claimed to see someone pacing barefoot across the tile floor with a book held upside down. Police reports were never filed. The journal surfaced through anonymous submission to a philosophy archive. No metadata, no digital trace. Its cover had no title. Pages hand-numbered, some scratched out with graphite so heavy the paper beneath had torn. Content was not narrative. Disjointed impressions. Half-formed sentences. Observations of water behavior in non-tidal zones. Descriptions of submerged chambers with ceilings shaped like skulls. Repetition of a single phrase in alternating syntax. Found without seeking. Found without seeking. Seeking found nothing. One entry described a descent. No location given. Only topographical references. A trench, a salt shelf, a drop in pressure so sudden it left blood behind the eyes. The body described was not the writer's. Yet every sensation matched personal memory. Tactile detail recorded in first-person register. Hands brushing sediment. Fingers catching against stone ribs. A sculpture without a face, still forming. Images not sourced from photography began appearing across the walls of his former office. Drawings scratched into plaster. Charcoal burned against brick. No color. Only form. Torso bending backward in a posture impossible for balance. Ankles fused. One palm open, the other buried into its own chest. Notes beneath each sketch written in reverse phonetic. Some translated into dead languages, though none complete. Scholars argued over whether they were lexicon or structure. The building was vacated within 3 months. The team that had led the Greenland excavation fractured in silence. Emails from their internal mailing list turned erratic. Project updates were replaced by single-word subject lines, no content. Words like drift, fine, false. None of them followed up. Meeting records became void. Minutes stopped being logged. Reports arrived without headers or closing signatures. Department heads attempted reassignment. 2 resigned outright. 1 transferred to forestry research. 1 went missing. He'd been last seen hiking along the basin ridge, retracing melt patterns on foot after satellite inconsistencies flagged anomalies in terrain reflection. No distress signal received. No gear recovered. Tracking beacon lost signal at elevation 0.6 kilometers from base camp, directly above the chamber where the sculpture had first been located. Helicopter teams ran 3 sweep. No scent trail. No disturbed snow. No signs of pressure displacement. His name was removed from the archival access list that same night. Those remaining stopped referring to the figures as sculpture. Internal documentation replaced every occurrence with neutral terms. Object, sample, item A names held too much shape. Description threatened proximity. No further expeditions planned. No replacements hired. Silence not imposed, but adopted. As if each of them had heard something they couldn't place, felt something behind them without motion, sensed a pattern that refused to repeat. Some forms arrive once. Once is enough. The report surfaced through an encrypted server disguised as a defunct geological archive. No citation, no watermark, no authorship. Only a file name composed of digits with no chronological anchor, no sequence tied to any known standard. It was discovered by a graduate assistant searching for seismic fault models in layered obsidian under polar stress. The assistant never responded to contact attempts after the download. The file opened to scan pages, original, unformatted, filled with annotations in 2 separate handwritings. The content was neither journal submission nor internal memo. It read like field documentation written in confinement. Page 1 began with a cross-sectional analysis of the sculpture's core. What had first appeared as homogeneous matter was revealed under coherent diffraction, mapping to contain an ordered lattice invisible to conventional imaging. Not molecular alignment. Not stress cracking. Something else. Buried within the material were fractures, each less than a micron across, spaced with unnatural regularity. These weren't signs of damage. They formed a structure. Multi-axis layering, mapped along triaxial grids, produced interference patterns resembling kinetic simulation. When fed through volumetric renderers, the grid produced a motion map. Not motion as in function. Motion as in memory. The simulation showed respiration. Not symbolic. Actual displacement of form, subtle expansion of rib curvature, contraction at the diaphragm, collapse of throat column consistent with swallowing. One lab's software flagged the motion as biological. Its default output renamed the file under vertebrate physiology. Further layers revealed minute degradation in cellular boundary modeling. Decay. Internal slumping of mass along organic stress points. Disintegration of tissue invisible from outside, yet perfectly structured within the lattice. These were not representations. These were states. Not sculpted into place. Suspended. Researchers observing the simulation noted the absence of any frame where the figure held still. No origin point. No completion. The lattice did not loop. It slowed, paused, resumed. No pattern repeated. No signature pulse. Just time made spatial. Age rendered into mineral. Attempts to decode the lattice as data returned null matrices. Nothing stored in binary or analog form. The structure didn't carry information. It was the information. Not message. Not metaphor. Presence. One annotation on page 17 referenced a hypothesis unreviewed elsewhere. The geometry was not preserving a figure. It was restraining an event. Each fracture served not to break, but to bind. Movement occurred only within confines of tolerance. No force applied externally. The motion was inward, natural, unscripted. What lay inside the sculpture was not an image of a man, or a woman, or a body. It was a moment, unreleased. A final scan used laser-induced acoustic microscopy to test internal pressure shift. The results arrived without waveform. Only a temperature shift at the center mass. A change of 0.4 degrees over the course of the simulation. Heat with no source. Not increase. Emergence. The report concluded with a summary of attempts to replicate the fracture lattice using synthetic quartz and fused carbon glass. Each attempt failed to preserve internal motion. Movement dissipated. Simulations collapsed into static matter. No lattice held beyond 3 layers. One attempt resulted in structural disintegration without impact. The final page of the document began with a paragraph describing a new shape discovered within the Iceland fragment, an angular shift in the upper clavicle forming a partial corridor not visible from surface scans. The shape mirrored part of a hydrological map found in a sunken valley off the western coast of Greenland, long beneath sea level. The writing described the possibility of. The file ends mid-sentence. No closing. No final mark. Only blank space. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.